All right, so have you ever felt like your brain is kind of like a web browser with like a zillion tabs open?
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah, well, that's where David Allen's Getting Things Done comes in. And
That's a classic.
we're not just skimming the surface today, that we are going deep on WHY. This system works not just uh, what it is.
Right.
You ready to declutter that mental desktop?
Absolutely. I am. And, I think the brilliance of Alan's approach lies in recognizing that stuff. Like all those to-dos and ideas and commitments.
Yeah.
It's not just a list, it's a psychological weight.
Okay, so it's not just about like being organized. It's about how that stuff
Hmm.
impacts us mentally.
Exactly. Imagine your mind is like a computer.
Okay.
Every open tab, every unfinished task, it consumes processing power. It's like cognitive load. That's why just having a to-do list isn't enough.
So how does GPD address that? Yeah, I mean, I get the whole like capture everything idea, but does just writing it down actually free up mental space?
It's more than just writing it down. It's about externalizing those thoughts.
Okay.
Think about it when you trust a system to hold those commitments.
Yeah.
Your brain doesn't have to keep reminding you. It's like hitting save on a document.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. It's
No.
like I've got this saved somewhere. I don't need to stress about remembering it.
Right. And that's just the first step.
Okay.
Allen's 5 stages of workflow: capture, process, organize, review, do.
Right.
They create a system for moving those thoughts from chaos to clarity.
Now, I've tried other productivity systems that felt way too rigid. Is GTD more about adapting to how you work best?
Absolutely. It's a framework, not a straitjacket.
Okay.
And it recognizes that how you work best today,
Mm-hmm.
might be different from tomorrow. That's why the weekly review is so crucial.
Right.
It allows you to adjust, recalibrate, and stay in control.
Speaking of control, I've always struggled with those huge EE projects,
Yes.
that feel paralyzing.
Yeah.
How does GTD help with that?
This is where the power of next actions comes in.
Okay.
So instead of like write a novel, which feels overwhelming,
Yeah.
becomes write 500 words to.
Oh, so it's about breaking those massive things into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Exactly. And by defining the very next physical action,
Yeah.
you shift from that vague mental realm to a concrete, actionable step.
Okay, I'm liking this, but realistically, I'm juggling work, family errands. How do I actually organize all this stuff in a way that works for my life?
Allen advocates for context-based lists.
Okay.
So instead of one giant to-do list,
Yeah.
you have calls at computer errands and so on.
Mhm.
This makes choosing actions easier,
Right.
based on where you are and what resources you have.
So if I'm stuck in traffic, I can focus on my calls list instead of getting frustrated that I can't tackle my at-computer tasks.
Right.
That's clever.
It's about aligning your actions with your context to maximize both your time and energy.
Okay.
And remember, the system itself can be as simple or as techy as you like.
Wait, so I don't have to use some fancy app if I'm more of a pen and paper person.
Not at all. The tool is simply a vehicle.
Okay.
The real power lies in understanding the principles behind each stage.
One thing I've always wondered about GTD is the whole horizons of focus thing.
Yeah.
Is that about linking those daily tasks to bigger goals?
Yeah.
Because honestly, sometimes I lose sight of the big picture when I'm just trying to survive the day.
That's a great point. And you're right. Horizons of focus is about connecting those day-to-day actions to something larger and more meaningful.
Oh, yeah.
Allen suggests thinking about your work on 5 different levels.
Okay, let's unpack that. I'm intrigued.
He starts with the runway, which is all about those immediate actions, those next steps we've been talking about.
Right.
But then he goes up a level to 10,000 feet,
Okay.
which is where you consider your current projects and responsibilities.
So it's like zooming out to see what you're working on this week or this month.
Exactly. And then you go even higher to 20,000 feet, which is about your areas of responsibility. This is where you think about your roles at work, at home, and your community.
Okay, so it's getting more big picture now, not just individual tasks, but your overall commitments.
Right. Then we go up to 30,000 feet, which is your 1 to 2 year goals. Okay.
This is where you start thinking about what you want to achieve in the near future.
So things like career goals, personal projects, maybe planning a big trip.
Exactly. And finally, you reach 50,000 feet, which is about your overall purpose and values.
Oh.
What kind of life do you want to live? What legacy do you want to leave behind?
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from empty the dishwasher to meaning of life in like 5 minutes.
Right.
But I get it. It's about connecting those small everyday actions to a larger sense of purpose.
Precisely. And by aligning your actions with your values,
Yeah.
you create a sense of motivation and direction that can be incredibly powerful.
But how do you actually make that connection? It's one thing to say have a purpose, but how do I translate that into actionable steps?
That's where Allen's natural planning model comes in, which is a five-phase approach to tackling those bigger, more complex goals. It's like a roadmap for turning those lofty aspirations into concrete results.
All right, I'm definitely feeling that aha moment coming on.
Yeah.
So walk me through those 5 phases. Where do we start? The first phase is all about defining your purpose and principles. Why is this goal important to you? What values are guiding your decisions?
Okay, so before I even think about specific steps, I need to get clear on the WHY behind the why. That makes sense. But what comes next?
Next is outcome visioning, which is about picturing the project as if it's already completed. What does success look like? What are the tangible results you want to see?
So it's about creating a clear mental image of the finish line. Like if my goal was to write a book, I would visualize holding that published book in my hands.
Exactly. It's about engaging your imagination and your emotions to fuel your motivation.
Interesting. So it's not just about logic and planning, it's about tapping into that creative energy.
Absolutely. And this is where that reticular activating system comes into play.
Go what?
It's a part of your brain that acts as a filter,
Hmm.
helping you notice things that are relevant to your goals.
Yeah.
So by consciously defining your desired outcomes, you're essentially priming your brain to find solutions and opportunities that align with your vision.
Wow, that's so cool. It's like setting an intention for the universe to conspire in your favor.
In a way, yes. And this is just the first 2 phases. We haven't even gotten to brainstorming and organizing those ideas. And then, of course, identifying those next actions.
Hold on. I need to catch my breath.
Yeah.
We've gone from overwhelmed to empowered in record time, but I have a feeling we're just getting started, right?
We are just getting started.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork understanding how our brains, get bogged down by stuff
Hmm.
and how GTD helps us externalize it and process it. We've even touched on those bigger picture goals in Allen's natural planning model, but I still have a lingering question.
Okay, what's that?
While this planning and organizing, it sounds like a lot of work, doesn't that just like add to the feeling of overwhelm?
It's understandable to feel that way, but consider this.
Mhm.
Have you ever spent like hours, feeling busy but not actually accomplishing anything?
Oh yeah, definitely.
GTD helps you avoid that by front-loading the thinking.
So it's about being strategic with your time and energy up front so you can actually get stuff done.
Precisely. Instead of constantly reacting to what's screaming loudest, you're making conscious choices about what matters most.
Okay, I see the value in that. But what about those inevitable interruptions and unexpected tasks that pop up throughout the day? Does GTD account for that real-life chaos?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Allen talks about a threefold model for evaluating daily work.
Okay,
First, you have your predefined work, those next actions you've already planned for.
right, the stuff on my carefully crafted lists?
Then there's work as it shows up, those unexpected emails requests from colleagues or sudden fires that need to be put out.
Let's be honest, that's usually what dictates my day.
And finally, there's defining your work, which is about processing those new inputs and deciding what needs to be captured and added to your system.
So it's like a constant flow between planning and adapting.
Exactly. It's not about rigidly sticking to a schedule. It's about having a framework that allows you to stay flexible and responsive, yet still in control.
You keep mentioning the weekly review, and honestly, that sounds like the hardest part to implement. I can barely find time to breathe, let alone schedule a dedicated block for review.
Think of it this way. Wouldn't you rather spend an hour a week getting organized than waste countless hours feeling scattered and overwhelmed?
Okay, you've got a point there, but I'm still skeptical. What exactly am I supposed to DO during this magical weekly review?
It's your chance to clear the decks and ensure your system is still serving you.
Okay.
You review your calendar, your action lists, your projects, and ask yourself what needs to be updated, what's changed, have any new commitments come up?
So it's about catching things before they slip through the cracks and become full-blown crises.
Yes. And it's also an opportunity to step back and look at the bigger picture. Remember those horizons of focus we discussed.
Right, connecting those daily actions to my long-term goals. It's like a regular check-in with myself to make sure I'm still on course.
Exactly. And the weekly review can also be a time for creative brainstorming.
Hmm.
When you're not caught up in the daily grind, you can ask yourself, what new opportunities are out there? What else could I be doing?
That's a good point. I always get my best ideas when I'm away from my desk, like when I'm on a walk or taking a shower.
It's about giving your mind that space to wander and make those unexpected connections.
You mentioned that GTD can be applied not just to individual tasks, but also to bigger projects. Can you give me an example of how that works in practice?
Let's say you're planning a vacation.
Okay.
Instead of having a vague idea of go to Italy, you'd use the natural planning model.
All right.
Start with your purpose. Why Italy? What do you want to experience?
Okay, so maybe my purpose is to explore Italian art and culture, indulge in delicious food, and spend quality time with my family.
Perfect. Then you'd move to outcome. Visioning, imagine yourself at the end of the trip. What are you feeling? What memories have you created?
I'm picturing myself sipping wine in a Tuscan vineyard, feeling relaxed and connected to my loved ones.
Great. Now brainstorm. What cities do you want to visit? What activities do you want to do? What kind of budget are you working with?
And this is where I'd start creating lists and breaking things down into manageable actions like research flights, book accommodations, create a packing list.
Exactly. By using the natural planning model, you create a roadmap that keeps you moving forward even when the project feels daunting.
This all sounds great in theory, but I'm curious, have you ever struggled to implement GTD in your own life?
Absolutely. I used to be a chronic procrastinator, constantly feeling overwhelmed by my to-do list. But when I finally committed to GTD, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders.
So it really did make a tangible difference in your day-to-day experience.
It did, of course. There are still days when I feel behind or scattered, but now I have a system to get back on track. It's like having a compass that always points me in the right direction.
You're making me feel hopeful, but I have a confession. I tried GTD a few years ago, and I kind of fizzled out after a while. What's the secret to making it stick long-term?
I think the biggest mistake people make is trying to do too much too soon.
Okay.
Start small, focus on mastering one stage at a time, and be patient with yourself.
So maybe I should just focus on consistently capturing everything for a week or two before I even worry about processing and organizing.
Exactly. Build those foundational habits first. And remember, the weekly review is your secret weapon for staying on track. Even if you only have 15 minutes, do a quick review to clear your mind and regroup.
Okay, that feels doable. But what about those times when I just feel completely unmotivated? Does GTD have an answer for procrastination?
One of the most powerful things about GTD is that it removes the mental barriers to action. When you know exactly what needs to be done and you trust that your system is holding everything else, it's easier to overcome that initial resistance.
So it's about eliminating those excuses and just getting started.
Right, and remember that 2-minute rule.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes just taking that first tiny step can create enough momentum to get you moving.
That's a great reminder. I often find myself putting off tasks that I know will only take a few minutes, and then they end up hanging over my head all day.
And those small wins can actually boost your motivation and make you feel more productive overall.
It's interesting. We've talked a lot about the practical side of GTD, but I'm also curious about the psychological benefits you mentioned earlier, that it can reduce feelings of overwhelm and stress. How does that work?
When you have a system for capturing and processing your commitments, you're essentially releasing them from your mind.
Okay.
This creates a sense of mental clarity and peace, knowing that you're not carrying that burden all the time.
It's like taking a deep breath and finally letting go.
Exactly. And that sense of calm allows you to be more present and engaged in whatever you're doing, whether it's work, spending time with loved ones, or simply enjoying a moment of quiet reflection.
I love that. And so it's not just about being more efficient, it's about creating a more fulfilling and joyful life overall.
Absolutely. And that's what I find so inspiring about GTD. It's a system that empowers us to live more intentionally, to focus on what matters most, and to create a life that truly aligns with our values and goals.
I'm feeling incredibly motivated to give GTD another try, but I'm also realistic about the challenges ahead. Is there anything else our listeners should know before they dive in?
I'd say the most important thing is to approach it with a spirit of curiosity and experimentation.
Yeah.
There's no one right way to implement GTD.
Okay.
Find what works for you. Be patient with yourself and don't be afraid to adjust your approach along the way.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about achieving some mythical state of perfect productivity. It's about finding a way to manage your commitments in a way that allows you to live a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think it's a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dives.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much to explore. We've talked about the mechanics of GTD, the 5 stages, the weekly review, even tackling those big, hairy goals with natural planning.
Right.
But I think what's resonating most with me is this idea that it's not just a productivity hack. It's almost a philosophy
It is.
of how to approach work and life.
Absolutely. Allen often talks about GTD as a way to achieve mind like water.
Okay, I love that imagery, but what does it actually mean?
So imagine like a still pond, you know, When you throw a pebble in,
Yeah.
it creates ripples, right?
Yeah.
But the water doesn't resist, it simply adapts.
Okay.
That's the kind of mental state, that GTD helps to cultivate.
So instead of freaking out when those unexpected tasks, pop up,
Yes.
I can be more like that pond, adaptable and responsive.
Exactly. And that responsiveness, comes from trust.
Okay.
Trust in your system, trust in your own judgment.
Right.
When you know you have a reliable way to capture and process those inputs, you don't have to hold them all in your head.
Yeah.
You can be fully present in the moment.
That's powerful.
No.
I'm picturing myself at work,
Yeah.
Instead of feeling that constant, low-grade anxiety about all the things I might be forgetting, I
Right.
can actually focus on the task at hand.
And that focus, translates into better quality work, less stress, and ultimately more satisfaction.
It's almost like GTD gives you permission to relax into the flow of work, knowing that you're not going to drop the ball.
And that's where the real magic happens, when you're not constantly battling that mental clutter, you free up space for creativity, for insight, and even joy.
For all the talk about efficiency and productivity, that's what I'm taking away from this deep dive. It's not just about doing more. It's about being more
Yes.
present, more engaged, more at peace with the work itself.
Beautifully put. And that's a feeling anyone can experience, regardless of their job, their workload, or their personality type. GTD is a framework for aligning your actions with your values so that the work you're doing actually feels meaningful.
Okay, I'm officially convinced, but let's say someone's listening to this and they're ready to take the plunge. What's the best way to get started with a GTD without getting overwhelmed?
Start with that mind sweep we talked about earlier.
Yep.
Grab a notebook, some sticky notes, whatever works for you, and just start dumping everything that's taking up space in your head.
Even the small stuff, like remember to buy milk or call my mom back.
Especially the small stuff. Remember, it's all about freeing up that mental RAM. Once you've got it all out, then you can start processing and organizing.
And if I get stuck
Yeah.
or feel like I'm not doing it right.
There's no such thing as doing it wrong. Experiment, find what works for you, and be patient with yourself. Allen's book is a great resource, but there are also tons of online communities and resources for GTD practitioners.
It's like joining a support group for people who want to take back control of their lives. I love it.
And remember, it's not about achieving some kind of productivity nirvana. It's about making small, consistent changes that add up to a big difference in how you feel and how you work.
So it's not a magic bullet, but it's a powerful tool for creating a more fulfilling and intentional life. I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners.
Couldn't agree more, and I would encourage everyone to approach GTD with a sense of playfulness and curiosity. This isn't about adding more stress. It's about finding more ease and flow in everything you do.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired and ready to declutter my mind, my desk, and maybe even my whole life. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Just this, trust the process. Be kind to yourself, and remember that true productivity isn't about doing more. It's about making space for what matters most.
Beautifully said, and on that note, we'll leave you to explore the world of GTD. Remember, we've got links to Allen's book and other resources in the show notes. Happy organizing.